Good afternoon. It is 5:30 p.m. The special meeting and public hearing of the Board of Trustees of San Elizario I.S.D. held this June 23rd, 2021 is now called to order. Ms. Garcia, roll call, please.
Ms. Licon, let the record state that not everyone is present. Mr. Axel Lopez is absent. Fernie Madrid and Mr. Eduardo Chavez is joining us from virtual.
Mr. Chavez, is absent as well. Mr. Chavez.
Oh, that's right, Mr. Chavez. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is absent as well. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. On March 16th, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meetings laws to the extent necessary to allow telephonic or video conference meetings in response to the coronavirus. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify the following. Notice that this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. We have a quorum in attendance. Members of the public are attending in person or by telephone conference, call, online access, and through use of an email link for questions. If a member of the public submitted written comments in advance, the board president or a member of the administration will read the comments into record before or during the board's consideration of that item. If you would like to provide a comment at a future meeting conducted by video conference or telephone call, please follow instructions on the meeting's notice. All other meeting procedures will adhere to the board adopted procedures to extent practical. An audio recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public at a later date. We apologize in advance for any unforeseeable difficulties and ask for your patience as we navigate unprecedented conditions. If you have questions about these suspended laws, please call the Office of the Attorney General at 888-672-6787 or by email at toma@oag.texas.gov. May we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Received with the San Elizario I.S.D. mission statement. San Elizario I.S.D. mission is to graduate students with skills to meet the demands for changing life by promoting student success is non-negotiable. Channeling resources to match the learning needs of students. Employing and retain quality staff so that San Elizario is a proud, innovative, and academically superior district. Item 2, open forum. We didn't have anyone set up for open forum, so we'll now proceed to item 3. New business, board action items. 3A, discussion and possible action to approve resolution of the board regarding SR3 and policy CB local, state and federal revenue sources. Mr. Roberto Rivas, Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Rivas.
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members, and Superintendent Dr. Chavez. This item is pretty brief. As part of the SR3 funding, the feds kind of released new guidance, and they pretty much TA's interpretation of it was, and my transfer is recommending this, is the districts actually formally adopt some type of a rule of a policy for placing these items on board agendas for public comment. So that's what you see on the resolution. There's the 2 bullet points. Those are the 2 recommended changes to this policy. And pretty much we need to provide an information item at a board meeting, and we need to publish that information on our website. And then, as you'll see on the agenda, we're going to give the public the opportunity to comment. So that's it. I am available to answer any questions.
So, under discussion, any questions?
I got a question real quick, Mr. Rivas and Mr. Chavez. Can you hear me? Okay. So on the second bullet point where it says approval of the grant application plan or award shall be by the superintendent or superintendent's designee, what is that referring to? Is that meaning that the superintendent or the designee are the ones that are gonna sign off on the, where the funds are gonna be spent, or what is that really referring to?
So typically, with federal funds, TA requires that the superintendent be the signer, the actual person designated in their secure environment to actually submit the application itself. So the superintendent would be the individual responsible for submitting the item through TEAL. That would not change. The only way that changes is if there's a policy that actually specifies the next position. That is the only time TA will accept somebody aside from the superintendent to submit an application.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions or further discussion? Now, may I entertain a motion, please?
I move to approve item 3A as presented.
A second. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor by Mrs. Hernandez to approve item 3A as presented, second by Mrs. Garcia. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Moving on to item 3B, discussion and presentation on the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, ESSER 3 funding. Mr. Rivas, you have the floor, sir.
So this next agenda item, this is the actual presentation. Previously at the budget workshop, we had included two slides, one that had this one and one that had the tentative budget by area. The purpose of this is to actually kind of dig deeper into what we're buying with all that money. So on the first slide, I'll also switch over. So this one, slide number 2, this one does not change. The intent and purpose of ESSER 3 is essentially to safely reopen schools and sustain the operations of the schools. Our allocation is $15 million. Just to put that number into perspective, the budget to be adopted later on is about $40 million, right? On average, annually, we receive about $2.5 to $3 million in federal funds. So if I take all our federal funding combined, Americans, all the title grants, the migrant grant, the TACI grant for the homeless students, it's about $2.5 to $3 million. This is a substantial amount of money, $15 million over 4 years, plus about another 5 to 6 that we will be getting with ESSER 2. That's about $20 million over 4 years. So that's more than what we get right now on average. So I think that's why the feds were really pushing on this public comment piece. So one thing I do want to add, because I just mentioned ESSER 2, it's 2 different grant applications. So pretty much everything that we're doing with ESSER 3 right now, we're going to do it again with ESSER 2. So you'll see agenda items like this, you'll see a section for public comment, you'll see another survey. So it's going to seem repetitive, but it's the way the grant's going to require us to go through the motions. But essentially, the allowable uses for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 are the same thing. So whatever essentially we cannot pick up with this pot of money, we try to move it into ESSER 2. So with that said, on the next slide, slide 3 here, you'll see the first couple of items that are allowable activities. These are just copied and pasted from the actual statute itself. There's 15 of them. Number 1 is very flexible. It pretty much says anything you can currently do with ESSA money, with IDEA money, with Perkins money, with adult education and family literacy act, you can do with this. Item number 2 is pretty much wanting us to coordinate with local and public health departments to kind of improve and be ready for the coronavirus, to prepare, respond, be ready for the coronavirus. Number 3, they allows for activities to address the unique needs of student populations referenced. These tend to be the ones that are most disproportionately affected by pandemics. Number 4, they want us to implement procedures and systems to improve our response efforts. Number 5, training MPD to staff for sanitation and minimizing infectious diseases. Number 6, we're allowed to purchase and supplies to sanitize and clean facilities. The next slide, you'll see number 7. planning, coordinating, and implementing activities for long-term closures to include providing technologies for students to be able to have online learning. Number 8, purchasing educational technology. Number 9, providing mental health services and supports. Number 10, providing and implementing activities for summer learning or supplemental after-school programs. This one's important because later on you'll see there's a requirement that forces us to reserve 20% of this money specifically for this. So I guess the feds kind of look at this item as being the biggest one to help address the loss of learning. On the next slide, you'll see number 11, kind of follows number 10, to address the learning loss among those students, those populations specified. Number 12 is facility repairs and improvements to enable the operation of schools to reduce the virus transmission. Number 13 kind of has to do with indoor air quality, HVAC systems, fans, window door replacements. Number 14 is to develop and implement strategies to reopen school facilities. And number 15 is kind of the catch-all, maintain the operation and continuity of services and to continue to employ staff of the LEA. So if y'all remember, I didn't read these verbatim because last year ESER 1 pretty much had a lot of the same thing. That's pretty much want everybody to open up. In Texas, we were required to provide, I guess, be open last semester, right? So a lot of these may be more specific or more applicable to districts and schools in different states that maybe may not be 100% open like Texas. In our case, we've already done a lot of, you see in the partitions, social distancing stickers, water fountain conversions. So later on, you'll see in the budget, there's less money for that because we've already kind of been open. We use a lot of the ESER 1 money for that purpose. And then so you'll see a lot more money targeted towards the lawsuit. On the next slide, on slide number 6, there's 3 requirements that pretty much driving this grant, right? The first one I mentioned earlier is they're requiring us to set aside 20% of this money for the loss, for learning loss. They want us to do after school programs, summer school, extended year programs, and they want us to do targeted instruction towards those student populations, low-income students, students of color, English learners, children with disabilities, students, homeless students, students in foster care, and migrant students. And so you'll see that actually becomes group number 1 later as the activity. And then there's 2 other requirements. The second one, we already have that plan. It's a safe to return in-person instruction and continuity of services plan. The difference now though is we have to update it every 6 months. And then it essentially becomes a living document. We are required to accept public notice. So I believe next month when it's brought forward for approval, we'll have an item again that says public comment on this plan. And then essentially it's going to be on our website, and every 6 months we're just updating it. If something changes, CDC says we have to do this now, or this is the recommendation, we will be updating that. And then the second document is the plan for uses of this pot of money. Essentially, TA is allowing us to either come up with a plan and put the plan online, or to actually put the grant that we submit to the state, which itemizes how we're going to use the money in there. And the same logic applies there. Every 6 months, we need to look at it. And it becomes a living document. So if something happens and we get additional public comment and public input later, we're able to kind of tweak that plan and then update it as needed. On the next slide, on slide 7, there's a couple of fiscal considerations with this. The first one has to do with supplement, not supplant. Typically, supplementing is the first little graphic you see. You have local funds, state funds, federal funds. The higher the funding source, in theory, it should be supplemental, right? So that's kind of considered what's known as supplement, not supplant. In this case, ESER 3 does not have that provision. So they actually let you supplant, which is the second graphic. You had a salary that was previously charged to the general fund, you can now charge it to the ESER 3 fund as long as it meets the intent of the grant. So if I'm able to justify that position under those, one of those 15 bullet points, and I'm able to swap people around. The beauty of that becomes, you'll see it on the budget presentation, all the extra projects that were identified and were included. We will be supplying some positions up to free up money in the general fund to work on some of those projects. And we have to do that because of the third graphic on here. So if we do supply, we still have to meet maintenance of that. So that essentially means that if I spent, say, 5 million in local funds and 5 million in state funds this year for a total of 10 million, I have to spend 10 million again next year. So if I supplant a salary that is allowed to be charged to SR3 and to SR3, I still have to spend that money in the general. But I have more flexibility in the general fund because I don't have to follow federal procurement, right? So I'm able to tackle things that perhaps I don't want, cannot use SR3 money. So like I mentioned, later on in the budget, you'll see what those projects are. Happy Christmas for everybody. Slide number 8, there's 2 FAQs I brought in. These are directly from TA's website. This first one is the reason why there was a resolution, is the reason why this agenda item is being presented. When the application gets submitted, there's a document of assurances where we have to assure TA that we did this, and that, right? And so one of those assurances is that we are informing the governing board that the state may not replace these funds in 4 years. So this is one-time money, 3 to 4 years of paying how we use the money. And then, so there's the answer. Does the board need to be made aware of this statement? And the answer is yes. Since there is a large influx of money coming in, when the funding ends, districts have the potential of running a deficit. If we get too comfortable with supplanting, one point the money goes away, I got to bring everybody back up. So they're requiring that we inform the board of this.
Is there a timeline for when we have to use it, or?
The grant allows 4 years through September of 2024.
Has to be completely used?
So the goal you'll see in slides later, a lot of the strategies are for 3 years, right? Everything 3 years, 3 years. Because of when the grant is going to be submitted, by the time it gets approved, by the time some of the staff gets hired, I may not have spent 3 full years, or maybe 2.5. So then I get that 4th year carryover to kind of trickle down and finish spending on the same thing with some of the retention cycles. So the number I used is the number we had as of the snapshot when Talia was here. But if we have less staff, then I'll have a little bit more money to use in year. So the year 4 plan essentially becomes all the money that's still left that hasn't been spent. On slide 9, this one is also from TA's website. And it's pretty much, because the question was asked to TA, how should we use the money? What do you recommend? So they're pretty much saying, you use your local data, come up with your own needs assessment to determine what best suits your district and your students. And then there's a section in the middle where it's saying TA strongly encourages school systems to plan for how to use these one-time federal funds over the entire period to facilitate a more comprehensive long-term approach to learning acceleration. So they're kind of saying don't go through it all in 1 year. Students are not going to recover in 1 year. Take a longer approach, spend it evenly. And then so they list those areas below: PD, extended instructional time, staffing. That's where the staff retention and recruitment incentive pays. That's where those retention stipends. I'm hoping they get approved because of that. Facilities, technology, mental health, and behavioral supports. So this kind of, if TA is saying this is what we're recommending, that kind of drives the next slide, slide 10. Oh, I'm sorry, it'll drive slide 11, but on slide 10, here's kind of the timeline. Grant was announced on April 28th. The application opened up April 29th, and then we had our first meeting April 30th. And there was a leadership meeting, 17. The leadership group, which included district coordinators, district directors, campus principals, campus APs, kind of got together, we got to brainstorm. We sent principals back to their schools. They had their own campus-based meetings, every single school. And they pretty much used the document that was created and used at the leadership meeting, same format, same categories, and pretty much asked their stakeholders, their teachers, their staff, what do you all think we need within these categories? Early June, pretty much I did the same thing. I sent it to special population department heads for their feedback, for their list of needs essentially. And then here we are today. Today's the meeting with the board to kind of go over what that looks like. And then there's also a section for public comment today. And then there is a survey available now this week, which kind of, because the grant specifies 15 allowable uses, the survey essentially was, here's what we can do. How would you prioritize it?
I like that part of the survey, because it's not really giving them, I mean, you did give the choices, but at the bottom, I think it has an option to place a comment. And I think, I do believe, and if I'm correct, that a lot of the school districts didn't give that option. They gave the option of you want this or you want that. And I really like that our school district, you know, put that option there to put a comment and say, you know, this is different from what you're offering, but at least we hear that input.
And we get to see it, and if it's a one-time project, then we can comment in the future. Hey, let me
Right.
do this.
I think that's
It's
awesome.
actually one of the required, it has the asterisk, right?
Yes, it
requires
does, so
comment.
you don't do that. It's awesome.
So that was, Mr. Rivas. and
Yeah,
Mr. Hernandez.
I was gonna ask who did those every.
Rivas and-
Thank you. On the next slide, on slide 11, here you see the categories. Essentially, like I mentioned, we kind of took what TA was recommending, the 6 uses, and then category number 7 becomes kind of the grant admin, and then the retention of employees, right? So these are the areas, the major areas that were identified. Here, I'm going to kind of break into each group. Slide 12, the first group is the loss of learning. Since a grant is requiring a minimum of 20% for this purpose, I mean, this is the bread and butter of pretty much the grant, right? So when we met as a group and we got feedback from the campuses, everybody has different needs, right? Depending on their population, depending on their schools. So essentially, the first bullet point, what it is, right now, every year the schools get money depending on the population of students. So they'll get GT money, they'll get SPED money for SPED students, bilingual money for bilingual students, and then they get this pot of money called Comp Ed money. And so the Comp Ed money is essentially a mirror program to the Title I. It's above and beyond. It's supplemental. It covers everybody at the school because the school's percentage of economically disadvantaged is higher than 40%. So this $1 million split over 3 years essentially is this. So if, as an example, if the high school gets $100,000 right now in their 199 Comp Ed, they're going to get $50,000 a year for 3 years. So they get what they're currently getting plus half of what they're currently getting in 199 for the next 3 years. So every single school is essentially getting a lot more money to address their needs. That's the way I came up with that first. The second part has to do with FTEs, and you'll see the bullet point there. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to spend on just books and supplies and materials. You can. Even once you add in technology, you'll see on the next slide. I mean, technology's taking a huge chunk, and there's still a lot of money left. And sometimes you just need more one-on-one time, right? More small group time, and pretty much a lot of the campuses during the budget hearings before this ESSER money asked for help. And so the addition of 12 professionals, campus-based FTEs, and 5 paraprofessionals should help that. It's about $3 million, like I said, spread over 3 years. It's about $1 million in salaries every year. And what those 12 individuals consist of is the high school, the middle school, the 3 elementaries would each get 2 professional intervention teachers. Loya, being the smallest school, would just get one. Then Loya, because Loya already has an 8 in every single classroom, they wouldn't get one of the 5 paraprofessionals, but the other 5 schools would. So essentially that paraprofessional would be more bilingual, pretty much more bilingual aid, while the other 11 teacher interventionists would be targeting your core classes, right? And then professional number 12 becomes a dyslexia teacher. Essentially, we already have one. We already have one in the district, but we now have a second one supporting the dyslexia.
And you said that, this would be over the next three years, right? Will we be able to handle it after those 3?
No, and that's why the job description, the job posting will say grant funded, and they will be
So
required.
they'll know that there's a time limit on the contract.
Yes, they will be required to sign an acknowledgement that the moment the grant funding is over, they are no longer, they don't have a
If
job.
for whatever reason we can.
Right, and so that also became a talking point, right? So 12 teachers, 5 aides, right? 17 individuals. You all see the resignations, the employee turnover. The employee turnover is always going to happen. It's happened 10 years ago. It happened 5 years ago. It's going to happen 5 years from now.
So they could very well get.
Yes, cannot guarantee it, but there is a chance that some of them may get placed.
Okay,
We may be able to place them,
okay,
and if we have to get an increase in enrollment, right?
right.
Then we would be. And then the last one has to do with, I guess, the instructional departments, right? Kind of like Mr. Teresita and Ms. Apodaca, they currently have money for homeless students, for migrant students. So they would get a little bit more money for that as well. P&I has money to support campuses with certain district-wide software. They would also get a little bit more money.
Would that be funding, like the food pantry or the pantry with, shampoo, special needs?
Well, not the food pantry, because the food pantry is an agreement through the
No,
Russell and
I mean-
Fighting Hunger.
Will we get the, shampoo and stuff?
Yes.
That be used for that?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I know,
So they get
I'm
for money
supplying. Yes, that's awesome.
for uniforms, things that those students.
Okay,
The next slide on slide 13, this group is technology integration. So the first bullet point, I don't recall, but this was the first year the board approved a one-to-one initiative, or one-to-one push for the high school. Right? There was a large purchase order. We decided to buy a new device for every incoming freshman. And then the goal was, all right, let's try to do this every year, right? So should there be another unforeseen exposure, then this is going to help because every school has an incoming cohort, right? The cohort being the grade level. So at Zambrano, the incoming cohort is your kindergarten. At Borrego and Alarcón, it would be your third graders. So this $1.8 million over 3 years essentially buys a device for every kid, for every student coming to that school. So every kindergartner would get a Chromebook that in theory should last 3 years, right? They jump with it first grade, they jump with it second
they
grade.
last.
They should have should have been different grade level.
Yes.
Same thing on Borrego, the middle school and the high school. And that Loya. So over the next 3 years, there's about $1 million they committed to doing just that. New devices for that incoming grade level to last their school, their education at that school. The second one, we have computer labs, and we're actually adding a couple more right now. One in Borrego. The $400 essentially replaces the device itself, just the desktop with the peripherals, the headphones. It's $400,000 to replace computers at all our computer labs throughout the district for the purpose of increasing the instructional day to help. And the last bullet point, there's active panels throughout the district, and slowly the campuses have been kind of upgrading them to be compatible with like Windows or Android, or depending on what device they're using to cast onto it. So based on the figure that technology provides, there's about $80,000 needed to kind of bring all of those pending active panels up to date with that stuff. The next slide, on slide 14, professional development. There's a requirement of the Title I funds that if one of your schools is identified as needing improvement, then you're supposed to reserve part of their Title I allocation for PD. So I followed that logic for the first one. So I mentioned loss of learning that it was 50% of their comp ed money. So this is also a percentage of their 199. So they're going to get 50% of the comp ed money for instructional use, and then they're going to get 10% of their comp ed money for PD. So this is above and beyond as well. And that comes up to about $105,000 over the 3 years. The next one is also to provide PD funds at the district level for the areas that P&I, the planning group, believes is needed district-wide, right? So this is to provide extra duty pay for teachers, essentially to show up on a Saturday. And it is allocating $150,000 over 3 years. So the estimate was every teacher, one Saturday over 3 years. Times 2, right? That's kind of what this budget is. So every teacher once a year over 3 years times 2 training, maybe an instructional one and maybe a technology one. And you'll see later on, there's that same example for mental health.
And so I just want to be able to add, as you see him, he keeps mentioning the 3 years. So what this means for the administration is that we continue to, our plan gets more strategic as we go. And we've actually sat and tried to calculate, okay, particular Saturday, we don't want to overwhelm our teachers by bringing them in too many Saturdays. So as the plan keeps going, as we keep developing it, and we keep getting the feedback that we're getting online as well, and as the conversations continue, it becomes more strategic. So you'll see more of it as we get closer, because that's what we need to do. It becomes clearer for us, and then we start a check and balance of, okay, what are we spending? What are we needing? Is this working? So forth.
These are local trainings.
These would be trainings here at the district that we can bring. So the first bullet point, the campus for campus funding, based on their needs assessment, if they find a good training at Region 19, they have the money for that. The second bullet point is money reserved at the district level for, we need a district-wide training this. And then so that money is provided to teachers to come here on Saturday. So
Who would give the trainings? The instructional specialists?
it would depend on the training depending.
Yeah, it could be a combination. We obviously have a strong planning and instruction team, and we have specialists in each one of the core areas, but it may also require that we reach out. Sometimes it's Region 19, sometimes it's other vendors, depending on what we're developing our teachers on.
Yeah, because right now I believe we sent instructional specialists out, right? And then they bring the training back to us.
That's a combination. Dr. Segovia, would you come to the microphone, please, and speak more to that?
Good evening, President Lincoln, board members, Dr. Mrs. Chavez. So it is a combination. There are times that we do send, it's called a trainer model. So we will send either the ISs or the IOs to get trained, and they come back and turn around. There are times you send a teacher group to meet the trainers. It just depends on our needs and availability to send employees out to the training.
Because of course, if we send teachers out to do the training themselves, it would be more expensive.
Well, we do have to take into consideration who's in the classroom, and sometimes we have the appropriate number of guests, teachers, and sometimes we don't. So it's a lot that needs to be considered. That's why the option of maybe having some of the trainings on a possible Saturday. I know that one of the conversations I've had with Dr. Segovia, and we'll be scheduling a meeting with Ms. Renegard to think about the future of our future calendars for school, is how would we embed staff development for our teachers, maybe picking 1 or 2 days a month where we have half days. Kids come in for half days so we can get that staff development, because we surely understand, respect that the fact that our teachers I mean, the pandemic has been hard overall, but we want to be very careful and strategic about not burning out our teachers. But we also want to make sure that we're complying with addressing the loss of learning, which means that, we want to have the children being taught with the best developed staff. And so it is going to take a combination of us looking at our school calendar. We may have to, in the spending of all this money, even though I know the resolution says that I get to press click and approve. There's a lot that goes in before that, because we also will be presenting this to the district advisory team for more input. We want to make sure that our calendar is able to help us sustain not only what we need to be doing for children, but what we need to also be doing for staff. And there is sometimes that balance is difficult, but we are looking, yes, we do have a year-round calendar. We are approved with the District of Innovation to continue with that, but we may look at either extra days for students or extra days for teachers so that we can, just be strategic about how we're going to approach this through the next 3 to 4 years.
Because that was the issue before, right? We were having so many trainings that we had to have guest teachers in for weeks at a time. Okay, thank you.
The next slide, slide 15. Next group is family, community, and engagement. First bullet point, same logic with 50% extra in loss of learning, 10% extra for PD. This one becomes 5% extra for parental involvement. The 5% is essentially what they have to reserve anyway with their Title I funding. So they'll still have their Title I funding with the 5% for parental involvement. Now they're going to get extra funding with an extra 5% as well over the next 3 years. And then the second bullet point is the addition of 4 parental liaisons. So this last year, only the middle school had a parental liaison, and there was one here at the district level. During this budget, the high school requested one through their Title I funding. This was before the ESSER money. So then the 4 campuses that essentially did not have one were the 4 elementaries. So those 4 paraprofessional positions would be a liaison for the 4 elementaries, the 3 elementaries and the primary, with the same acknowledgement. After 3 years, there's no more funding.
Bravo on that one. We need parent liaisons at every campus. I love that one.
Principal like that.
Yes.
And the third bullet point, same concept. Campuses get some money. Perhaps we have staff, and then the department supporting that area also get additional money as well. And then I do want to note there was a request from 2 different heads, both Ms. Sanchez and Ms. Sanchez, to provide parents the opportunity, like a session where they could be taught how to use a computer and how to log in and how to check emails. So we already been pushed for that, either via a teacher or current adult-based again teacher, where let's offer sessions to the parents of our students only on how to kind of use and help their student with their needs. So,
Parents only, I'm sorry, or can it be like grandparents or anybody?
who's responsible for the kid, for the student?
Yes.
Yes, the guardian.
The guardian, yes. Parent, grandparent, whoever is going to be helping the student. As long as the students will. Hopefully you can increase it. On slide 16, safe to return in person and continuity of services. This is the one I mentioned earlier where there's less focus on this now because we have been open, we have been operating. And there's a lot of federal procurement regulations regarding construction. So first bullet point is pretty much buying devices. It's not really changing out HVACs. It's buying air purification devices for school buses and HEPA air scrubbers and changing out HVAC filters sooner. That's going to be about $500,000. There's also, we also have to sustain PP replenishment levels and then cleaning and disinfecting supplies. So you see about $175,000 over 3 years. Then there's other things we need: additional thermometers, student test shields, scanners, additional packing and delivering equipment for the cafeterias, serving modalities for food service production equipment. So these are kind of things that we need just to kind of keep operating at the pace we're operating. Right? Things that we're doing different than we did 2 years.
Roberto, for the PPE and all that, the thermometers, thermal scanners, what if we don't need them in 3 years?
Then that money carries over to year four,
Okay,
and I can
and we can
use them.
build the steam.
Not with this money, but
Oh, okay. I just had to throw it out there.
I'm listening to it all right.
Okay.
Slide 17, mental health and behavioral supports. So here, it's the addition of one FTE. Speaking to the SPED director on her needs assessment, she wanted a part-time counselor and additional money to provide evaluation services through an LSSP. So speaking to her, I said, why not just get one full-time where they could do both? She loved the idea. So this professional FTE is going to be, it's essentially one LSSP that can both do evals and provide assistance to the SPED counselor, pretty much district wide, and the same acknowledgement, 3 years, grant funded, costs about $245,000. The second bullet point, it's $75,000 for extra duty paid to teachers. It's the same methodology that I mentioned before, except this one would be triggered, specific to just counseling. It's pretty much every teacher once a year, 3 years in a row, that Saturday training, whatever that campus believes is needed for counseling or whatever's identified at the district level. And then same thing, a little bit more in department funding to help support these areas. Slide 18, grant administration and retention of employees. Percentage-wise, this is where most of the money is, as you'll see on the following slide. The first bullet point here. So in an effort to address the impact of the pandemic and disruptions leading to learning loss, we're allocating about $3.4 million over the next 3 years to retain existing staff by paying staff, right? Why minimize employee turnover? Staff we have, whether it's a faculty member or a staff member, they know the district and more students. Bring somebody new in, got to catch them up, right? So we want to minimize employee turnover for the next 3 years. The next bullet point, this is the one that's going to tie later on to the budget adoption. So we are able to supplant like free up resources in the general fund. And you'll see the note on effectively procured through local funds, right? So essentially, if I use federal money to pay for a minor renovation or to pay for construction, which was later clarified, including minor renovations, right? Minor renovation is an added drop to a classroom, and we're going to add electricity. Project may be $5,000 using local funds, using local prevailing wage rates. If I use this pot of money, I got to follow all the federal rules. I follow the Davis-Bacon Act. I got to get certified payrolls from the contractor, certifying that they paid their employees the higher rate, and then you bring in the provision of the domestic preference, essentially buy America. So if we're going to construct, then you need to buy lumber that's sourced from America somewhere else. So things like that drive up the price, and TA actually, the application actually has to specify all these. So TA actually has to pre-approve all of these construction projects because they got to make sure we're following EPA standards, and for air quality, we're following what is recommended. I mean, it's if you look at that FAQ, it's probably the biggest answer. So this 875 over the next 3 years is going to help pay for some of the things through local funds that we need. And then finally, the last one, the indirect costs. This is essentially because we're spending time on the ground, we're paying employees on the ground, we're writing purchase orders, we're able to charge them an indirect cost for all of those, right? It's kind of flat rate, it changes every year. And so this $2.3 million is essentially extra revenue in the general fund, but it's going to go away once the grant goes away. So we can't commit this to salary pay increases, but we can commit it to one-time projects. So both the supplanting part and the indirect cost, you'll see later on in the budget adoption, have have it split up as columns as to where that money is going now. Slide 19. So the summary of the funds by area identified. So this is kind of the breakdown, the percentages based on when it was submitted for sending out to the board last week. Earlier this week, we kind of had a regroup meeting. The survey was out. We kind of began looking at some of the results. Kind of honed in on two additional positions that were not on here, but we would like to take them and include them. One of them being coordinator of school improvement for the middle school. It's essentially kind of like an assistant principal without the admin duties, without the counseling duties. I mean, loss of learning is going to hit everybody. Middle school tends to be the harder school, even in the good years. So, and they did request an additional assistant principal. We said we can't give you an assistant principal, but we can look at getting a coordinator of school improvement to help the school. That one would fall under loss of learning. Group 1.
I also want to be able to add that at the middle school, that's the campus that we have the least amount of time to work with students in tested areas. And so we need somebody who is completely dedicated to assisting with the instruction and keeping their focus. And so that's where, having this person support instruction would be beneficial.
And the other position that I proposed actually was a coordinator for this SOP. So logic behind that, whenever TA gets money, gets grants like this, they use some of that money to hire auditors to audit the program, right? Like I mentioned earlier, so this is 15 million. SR2, our SR2 allocation is it's going to be 5 to 6 million depending on, so that's a total of 20 million. Over 4 years, it's 5 million a year. If I add up all my other federal funds on average, it's 2.5 million. So this is double what I'm getting on average for the next 4 years. It's a lot of money and a lot of responsibility to split between everybody the way we're doing it. And TA has been very vocal. Mr. Corey Green, he said, I've worked here for 20 years. I've never seen so much money go out at the same time. Expect audits, expect site visits, expect surveys. The feds are going to get scrutinized because it is so much stimulus money. So essentially what the vision behind this coordinator for the ESER program is to be the auditor that we have on staff, to have the funds ready for when they come. We have all the ducks in line. I use the word auditor, but it'd be more of an instructional focus and component, because if you see all this, somehow ties back to instruction. So that would be the second position that we identified that is not on the presentation. We would want to.
So the individual in this position is kind of like our check and balance. One, making sure that we are spending the money where we need to, but a bigger component to that, because those of us who have worked with grants are very familiar, understand that TA, the federal government, is always looking to see what our data is saying. And sometimes that's what people forget to collect along the way. So it's really important that we have not only the check and balances on the money side, we want to make sure that on the instruction side, we're able to gather the data that's needed to show if our students are moving in the direction that they should. The individual in this position would also help us to be able to identify, to really pull those reports for our students where, and it's not just reports, it's quite a bit of information, but to pull the data that is needed to make decisions, because we may have to shift. This is what we're saying is our proposed plan. This is what we're going. But let's just say that whatever it is we're doing for reading is working, but it's not working in math. Do we need to kind of regroup and say, hey, this is what we want to do. This is what we need to do differently. And so that individual will just ensure that the district and remains in compliance with the money that is being utilized. And we start flagging early how those monies are spent, the different activities or strategies being utilized. So they'll have their hands full with really being connected to instruction and especially the interventions and really addressing how we're going to do the loss learning improvement for our students.
And they would be funded out of the last category, the grant admin and retention of employees. So Remember in the last bullet point regarding the indirect costs, the position essentially is an indirect cost. So it would claim less because I'm putting that position through.
Would that be including the aides on that one?
No, the aides would fall under the loss of rate.
It's a pretty substantial amount. So on retention of employees, what would be the plan for that?
So that's the $3.4 million. So at the last board meeting for the compensation adoption, so the regular salaries are funded through the general fund or through the Title I, the regular funding. Then should it be approved through the grant, there's going to be a $2,000 stipend that's approved for existing employees that are still here on October 1st to be paid mid to late October. And then to include the substitutes that worked, remember there was a higher amount.
Okay, so it was for ESER 3, not the other.
Oh, the retention stipend alone, just the stipend. So whether it's substitutes, all employees, there's that retention stipend is being paid out of this group.
Okay.
And the plan is to earmark enough money to do that for the next 3 years.
Oh.
So pretty much whatever was presented, 2,000 for a full timer, 1,000 for a part timer. There's money being earmarked for the next 3 years.
So for the, going back to page 6 or slide, when it says after school programs, what are you referring to? When you say after school programs?
So this is the language that the Fed's putting, and then
This new,
Again, part of the discussions we've had is targeting tutoring. There's a new House bill that came out. We were getting the presentation the other day. Students that are not successful in the STAR or in the course will now be required 30 hours of tutoring mandatory. And so that would be one example. Just make sure we're very targeted with our after school tutoring is what we're looking at.
So it doesn't mean like and per se, there's districts that have like after school programs.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's
what I was thinking, like maybe like a.
I asked on clubs.
My program, like
Right, well, we're actually waiting to hear from TA through the Boys and Girls Club. We actually interviewed, we feel good about it, right, Dr. Segovia? And we were in a meeting, I guess maybe like 2 weeks ago, with TA and the El Paso Boys and Girls Club. And so we're waiting to hear pretty soon and bringing that to our district as well. So that's one of the things, the discussions we've had is about, just extra clubs or things that the children can get engaged in. This unfortunately is specifically targeting, the core areas of the math and reading and learning loss. But I know that we'll keep identifying other opportunities so that we can add. I know that we do have the intramurals, which will kick up this next year, for our students in grades, 5th grade and 6th grade. So we'll keep looking for those opportunities and any other possible clubs that can be offered for students.
I was just a little confused because I'm like, I thought it was, when you said after school program, I was like, it's referring to tutoring, but I wasn't sure if you were referring to that, but can it be something that can be integrated, like maybe have an after school program like the Boys and Girls Club that maybe can help tutor, like help children with their homework and tutor them at that?
We could definitely consider that as we move forward. I know that if we do get accepted to this grant, the documents.
When we get accepted.
When we get accepted to the grant, it comes with, of course, homework help, but then they also bring in Kids Excel, which is a dance team that comes in and teaches the kids to dance, and then it also comes with arts and crafts. So there's three different things that are going to happen with our kids there. Right now, we do have a summer camp that includes soccer and literacy. And so we started out this year. We also have the TAPS program at the high school that targeted students that were at risk. It has been highly successful. That comes with, we are in agreement with the Sheriff's Department. So in the morning, they do some loss of credit recovery. In the afternoon, they do all sorts of activities with the deputies. And so those are things that we're actually talking about that. We need to keep those throughout the year and find little places for us to do it. So those are the.
Montiz, you, Dr. Segovia, we thought you were just a singer, but you're also a dancer. We saw those dances.
So we're gonna have intramurals again for the 6th.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, those are all things, we obviously know that the TA wants to, and parents, they want us to address the loss of learning, but we also know that it's the athletics, the extracurricular, the theater arts, the music. It's all those organizations, additional, that's, for some of our students, that's what they want to come to school for. So we're keeping that balance to bring that in.
Yes.
So with that said, I'm on slide number 20. Last one, any questions, comments, feedback?
Oops, I jumped the gun.
I think I did it all through the whole presentation. My computer has.
Questions? No. Mr. Chavez?
We can go ahead and move on to item 3C. Public hearing and input on the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, ESSER 3 funding. Mr. Cruz.
Good evening, once again. So for this agenda item, we have to open it up to the public and see if anybody has any input or comment, whether in person or online.
To the public.
Does anybody have one? At the register, there's no public input or comment on the issue presentation.
Okay, duly noted. Item, then we'll move on to item 3D. Discussion of property values and funding lag in accordance with the school first 2021-2022 rating indicator number 20. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Board President McCollum, board members, and Superintendent Dr. Chavez. Every year, there is the first rating that comes out, and one of the requirements, when they redid the ratings, they redid them to include this one, where we also have an agenda item, discuss the funding line with our Board of Trustees. As part of the audit, the auditors actually do look through the agendas, and they do make sure I had an agenda item. It was on the meeting, so that's why this is on here. There's a kicker though. The kicker is the first indicator was included, the first ratings were updated, and then House Bill 3 came in and changed the way funding. So the idea behind this was previously, before HB3, districts were being funded based on their property values and collections from the previous year. So if we are in year 2021, they would have been funding us based on our property values and collections last year. So if we grew a lot last year and we don't get the funding, we wouldn't have gotten the funding last year, we would have got the funding this year. HB3 changed that, and now we're funding based on property values in the current year, which is why the tax rate is now not adopted until the September meeting, because TA essentially, the CADs around the state have their deadline of July 25th to provide taxing entities with certified values. And then TA is pulling all that data and providing us with the maximum compressed rate, the MCR, by the end of August. So essentially, this agenda item is just, have an agenda item that says we shared it with them. So.
Thank you. No, okay. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Item 3E, discussion on proposed budget and proposed tax rate for the 2021-2022 school year. Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Good evening, Board President McCollum, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Chavez. Here is, so we've had 2 budget workshops, and this would be the budget adoption. Discussion on proposed budget and the proposed tax rate. On the next slide, you'll see the actual notice that went in the Texas County Carrier. There's a standard template of what the language needs to say, what the calculations are that need to be included. And here's a snippet of the actual, of what it was, and it was published on June 10th. On the next slide, because it is a public hearing on budget and tax rate, this slide I've shown it before on budget workshops, but need to bring it in again. Essentially, there's two types of tax rates, the M&O and the I.S. M&O pays for day-to-day stuff, teacher support, staff salaries, equipment, utilities, supplies, and then your I.S. pays for bonded debt. So you'll see on the next slide, the same blue and red, you'll see the first graph, 2020 tax rate comparison. So the blue portion for this 2020 year that is ending is our M&O, and then the red portion is the I.S. So you'll see where on the lower end, there's only one district that was higher, that was lower than us, which was Anthony I.S.D, who was lower than everybody else. The best part about this graph is the red portion, the I.S. We're on the lower end compared to the other districts, right? So means if in the future when we have enrollment growth, we'll have the bonding capacity to, if we need to build more buildings, to build more buildings, because the interest and sinking rate is so. On the next slide, the rate history, this just kind of shows you what's happened with our rate. So the first column is before the tax rate went up because of the bonds. So if you look at the I.S., it was at 0.0518, and then it went up to 0.1250. That was because during that year 15-16 is when I had to make the first payment on the bond, the current outstanding bond that we have. Then you kind of see a history as to what's happened with that rate. And the third column to the right, year 1920, compare that to the year before 1819. This is when HB3 kicked in. So you'll see the blue, the M&O, it dropped, it compressed. That's what TA is doing now. They're compressing local rates in order to alleviate those districts that were being affected by recapture. And then if you look at 1920 versus 2021 for the red sections for the I.S., when the bonds were sold, they were sold at a premium, meaning we had more cash on hand that was needed compared to the construction budget. So we were able to utilize that cash on hand to keep the I.S. rate low. We're able to keep it at 12, 13 cents, 11 cents by using some, essentially kind of sat in the I.S. fund as a fund balance. We're able to draw from it. And so as you see now, at one point, that fund balance is going to go away, and we have to tax at where we need to tax, right? And so you see happening in the last 3 years is be taking advantage of the compression. So as the state is compressing the M&O, I'm increasing the I.S. so that the taxpayers don't feel the big jump on the last year. So instead of jumping 7-8 cents on the last year, it's going to be a gradual increase until that I.S. rate gets to where it needs to be. And what's allowing that is HB3 and the compression of the M&O. So as the M&O gets lower, it increase the I.S., which we're allowed to do because it's like pay back that bond up until the point where it's generating enough funding to pay itself off. So we can't have a surplus fund balance in I.S. On the next slide, here you see two snippets from the notice in the West Texas County Courier. Appraised values skyrocketed. I mean, this was nationwide, right? So you see the appraised values up top, and on the bottom, there's been talk. There's been stories where local entities in the city, county, state, they're saying we're not increasing our rate. We're going to keep the rate the same, but you're still going to have to pay more because appraised values went up, right? So look at this bottom one here. What's happening to our rate? Our current rate right now is $1.17, and the proposed rate, based on preliminary data, is $1.11. So even though San Eli's proposed rate is going to decrease because of the compression on the M&O side, the average residence in San Eli is still going to see a higher tax. So have other entities that are keeping the rate the same. People are going to have to pay more. We're actually lowering our rate because of compression. All districts are, but everybody's going to have to pay more just because of the rate. The next slide, enrollment comparison. This slide I've shared before. I pretty much just added another column. The data was now available for the 2021 year. Here's the rule regarding the 5-year enrollment change to declare financial exigency. And here you see that calculation for every surrounding district. Essentially, once you hit more than 10%, you've lost a lot of students in the eyes of TA. So if you look at the last column, the 2021 year, El Paso's at 14, Fayetteville's is at 11, we're at 17%. Anthony's almost there, they're at about 9, Tornillo's at about 19%. Pretty much same message. The two districts that are growing are Socorro and Dio. Everybody else is kind of decreasing, but I do want to note that if you compare 1920 to 2021, even Socorro saw less kids, and so did Canopy. So even though they've grown for the last few years, they both saw a decrease last year, which was probably COVID. So on the next slide, we spoke about taxes. That's how you generate the revenues and the students bring in the money. So then what does that look like for the operating budget? This is the graph. 5,700 local revenue, 5,800 state revenue, 5,900 federal revenue. Our biggest chunk of money, 80% of it is state money, and it's derived by students. The next slide, you'll see the same information but for expenditures. 6,100 covers payroll, 6,200 covers contracted services, 6,300 supplies, 6,400 other operating, 6,500 debt service, and 6,600 capital outlay. So this is only for the general fund. It does not include the debt service fund. That's why you see a zero there. We used to have a bond that was an IFA bond that was being paid through the general fund, and then defeats this school year, so it's not included in the budget for next year. Here, like I mentioned before, students bring in most of the money, employees take most of the money. Payroll is about 80% of the overall expenditures. So on the next slide, the data for those graphs by category is actually end up looking like this. This is the operating budget. TA requires that we present these to the board at the functional level. The board approves the budget based on the functional level for the expenditures and at the object level for the revenues, which is why you see 57, 58, and 59 for revenues, but for expenditures, you see them broken down by category. So this is now the budget, including the pay raises that were approved. We do see revenues under expenditures by about $215,000. Not really concerned because if you look at function 81, there's about $190,000 there. Those are one-time costs associated with the pathway of champion. So essentially, budget is balanced after the pay raises. Slide 11, extra projects. This is good stuff. This is the interesting stuff.
This is my favorite.
This is everything. So this slide right here is a list that had been previously provided to the board. It is the running list of projects that we identified. We brought them through. This is what we were trying to use our leftover bond funds to pay for. The ones in green are the items that we had money left over for. The middle section are the projects that were canceled because of the needle bipolar ionization project where we created the HVACs to, I guess, have cleaner air. And then the section in red is what we didn't have funding for, right? So this is kind of a running list that keep so that when funding opportunities come up, we're able to kind of refer back to it. So you see the estimated cost and then you see the status. Some of them are in progress. There's 2 of them. You'll see it says for approval. They're actually on the agenda later today. And then you see some where it says 199 budgeted function 11. So these are some of the ones. So you'll see from Alacon and Borrego and Computer Labs. I mentioned the heavy requirements for minor renovation projects, which the feds are identifying as anything above $2,000. Quicker, cheaper is just use 199 money. And then so you see kind of a column on the right where it says it's in the 199 budget. So these are the projects based on what I saw, based on the indirect costs. This is what I was able to kind of build in for year 1. We're going to try to get to all of them. cannot guarantee that we can because of pandemic, supply chain constraints, shortage in materials, but everything that you see with the number at the far right is what we're gonna try to get to this year. There are items on here on this listing, especially, there's a lot of HVAC improvements. So what I have my purchasing specialist doing right now is reviewing a lot of those federal requirements, because some of these HVACs, if we're able to maybe justify that, you know, it's gonna improve air quality by meeting all the federal procurement requirements, maybe I can build them into the ESSER 2 grant and secure funding for them. On the next slide, you see the group of projects that were identified or needs identified during the budget process itself. So these were maybe not, these were identified this year, and some of them, like I said, some of them are in the budget. Some of them are actually currently encumbered. Things like a mower. And so here you see the status and you see the functioning code. So later on when you see the budget, the functioning code where that money is noted later. That's how you reference it. And then finally on the next page, extra projects. These are the projects that kind of came up as part of the ESSER needs assessment that I chose not to run through ESSER and I chose to run them through 199. Things like the music program, right? Things like additional digital thermometers. By the time the grant gets approved and funds are available, you know, like school may be around the corner, it may be better to buy some of those now. Departments like SPED, CT, and bilingual, they all kind of requested additional money. In the case of SPED, it's smaller ticket items, upgrading technology for the classroom, kidney table, students, the sensory room. Instead of, you know, running through the procurement, trying to find all that and justify that through ESSER, I'm going to supplant money out and kind of give them additional 199 money to do that. There's communities and schools that us came in for the middle school and forward. So that's kind of built in. Then the same thing applies for technology. There was a lot of technology items, both on this page and on the previous page, kind of like a router, a server, a filter to increase the bandwidth, right? Trying to get ESSER and ESSER approved contracts for that maybe too much work. So it's easier to kind of move money around and still spend it in 199 to facilitate the purchasing process. So overall, here you'll see at the very bottom, it says total budget about $983,000. A lot of these one-time projects. So if you move on to the next slide, here you see the 2021 budget. This is the budget that includes the pay raises. And the second column, extra expenditures. This is what I mentioned before on the three previous slides. This is everything I'm trying to build into this budget. So you see your operating budget, you see the extra expenditures and how are you being paid? That's the next column, right? I'm going to get additional money in indirect costs. I'm going to supplant money by charging salaries in 199 to ESSER, which is about $400,000. It's going to be 6 teachers and 1 aide. So then the actual budget for adoption becomes the last one. So that's kind of, it's going to be the layout for the next 3 years is here's your operating budget, and then here's what else we can do and how we're funding it by supplanting it, by having the one-time indirect costs, and then here's your adopted budget. So if you look at the adopted budget, revenues under expenditures, about $200,000. So the budget is essentially balanced operating wise, and then all these one-time extra expenditures are balanced through the supplanting. So overall, as long as enrollment holds, we should be in a good spot. So this is the 199 budget for adoption. And on the next slide is the debt service budget, which is being proposed for adoption. So here you'll see under the 1819, towards the bottom, the total fund balance is about $722,000. So I've been picking at it, kind of decreasing it to keep the tax rate low. But as it gets smaller, I eventually have to begin increasing the INS rate. Right? So instead of what we could have done, we could have boost it all up in 1 year, but then look at what that does to people's tax rates. You're at 10 cents, you drop to 5, and then you go back up to 15, and you say, what's going on here? So instead, the plan was, let's keep it steady, and as the fund balance, as we begin eating up the fund balance, we slowly, gradually increase the INS rate. And so the proposed budget for next year is a higher INS rate. And then if you look at the difference between revenues and expenditures, it's now beginning to kind of balance out. So that's a final slide. Is there any questions the board may have?
You like the ribbon beef?
I saw something to really like in there. I just have a question. It's just, so are you all still doing co-ops or continue to do co-ops?
Yes, we have. Today I have 2 co-ops for technology this summer, 1 for HR, and then 1 for SPED, 2 at the high school.
Continue.
Yes. This year we didn't have any at the high school because they were kids. Just,
Move on to item 3F, public hearing of proposed budget and proposed tax rate for 2021-2022 school year. Mr. Rivas.
evening, once again, board President Lincoln, board members, and Superintendent Chavez. Part of this agenda item is to allow for public input on the budget that was just presented and proposed tax rate. At this point, I'd like to open it. Everybody on one? It's too many people jumped in at the same time in the server. That's it, the record show, before there's any going, there's no public input.
Item 3G, consider and possible board action on adoption of accelerated instruction budget for the 2021-2022 school year. Mr. Rivas.
This item is kind of like the one regarding the first rating. The code requires that the board adopt a budget for providing accelerated instruction to students before adopting the full budget. So as noted on the memo, I pretty much copied that section from the FASB regarding the compact program, which is what that money is supposed to be used for. And then, so you see pretty much see the statute, what you have to do, what the purpose of the money is, and then you see under the budget impact of the memo, you see the obligations. So earlier when I mentioned the campuses received combat allocation, and I said, under ESSER, they're going to get 50% of what they were getting. Under combat, this is their combat budget. So you see campus going, campus Bolero, campus Jams. You see some of the payroll allocations as well, the at-risk teachers, intervention aides, social workers, summer schools, STAR labs. Essentially, the combat budget for adoption is 2.1 million at the moment. There is a star next to the class size reduction. That number is not known or finalized until actual students show. And the way that works, if we have 4 teachers in a grade level, and then the average is going to depend. The average class is going to depend based on the period of the day. So a lot of times we may have 1 extra teacher, or if you were to remove that teacher, the average may be 25 or 20. So essentially that was not known until school starts. This one, there really is no major change from the previous year. The combat budget kind of holds the same. So that's it. I'm available to answer any questions.
Who's open? Discussion? No, and I will need a motion to be cited.
I saw.
Motion by Ms. Garcia, second by Ms. Hernandez as presented. All those in favor? Aye. Ready? Mr. Chavez? Mr. Chavez?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute it. Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Item 3H, consider and possible board action on the adoption of the official budget for the 2021-2022 school year. Mr. Rivas.
Board President Licon, board members, and Secretary Dr. Chavez. This is the last item. Essentially, this is the budget document that was on presentation. It was, except the column that has the salaries, the column with the expenditures, and how we're gonna fund those. By supplanting and having it in your house, the final column becomes the actual budget for adoption for the general fund. On page 2, you see the debt service fund for adoption. So with that said, if board doesn't have any questions or questions.
I make a motion to adopt the official budget for the 2021-22 school year.
So we have a motion by Ms. Garcia, seconded by Ms. Hernandez. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivas. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivas. Very detailed. Thank you very much.
You get the celebrations, right?
Okay. So we now move to item 4, the consent agenda. To consider any possible board action items. Are there any items you'd like to pull on for discussion? Mr. Chavez?
No.
If not, then may I please have a motion for these items, to accept these items? A motion from Ms. Hernandez.
I was waiting to see if
Second, from Ms. Garcia.
I wanted to give you a chance, Mr. Chavez.
Okay, so all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion opposed? Motion carries. So, Item 5, executive session. The board will enter into a closed meeting to discuss personnel matters, to consult with attorney, to discuss real estate matters, to consider recommendations for hiring of personnel or termination of personnel and other personnel matters under section 551.071, 551.072, and 551.074 of the Texas Government Code at 6:52 p.m. Thank you. Please mute your mics and turn off the videos.
One.
The board will return to open session to take possible action on the matters discussed in executive session at 8:08 PM. Item 6A, discussion and possible action to approve administration's recommendation to assign Principal Jalissa Esquivel from Loya Primary School, Zambrano Elementary School to Loya Primary School. Any discussion on this item? May I have a motion to accept this, Esquivel as the Loya principal?
I so move.
Okay, motion by Ms. Hernandez. May I have a second?
I second it.
Okay, second by Mr. Chavez. All those in favor?
I
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item 60. Discussion and possible action to approve administration's recommendation to assign assistant principal Ernesto Siegel from one elementary school to principal at Zambrano Elementary School. Any discussion on this item?
I make a motion. Motion by Mr. Siegel to principal at Zambrano Elementary.
Okay, second. Motion by Ms. Garcia, seconded by Ms. Hernandez. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 7, reports, information, presentation. For information, Mr. Incident of information, I'll have.
Oh, it's that one.
Item 8, next meeting date, regular board meeting, Wednesday, July 14, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. Item 9, adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn at 8:10 p.m.?
I move to adjourn at 10 p.m.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. A second?
Second.
Okay, and a second by Ms. Garcia. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, here, Mr. Chavez.
No, I don't know.
Was there an aye?
Oh, no, I don't oppose. I'm good.
Okay, okay, motion carries. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you, Sir Lucius, Sir Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.